There remains speculation as to exactly why Drew chose to land the plane on a beach versus putting it down at the nearest airfield. If he explained himself when it happened, that explanation has been lost to time.
Now, the beach at this time was under the control of the French military. And they, of course, when they noticed a strange airplane sitting down on their beach, they went out there with some questions. When they were apprised of what had happened, they instructed the crew to fly to the nearest airfield and phone the police. And when they did this, they offered a fairly simple explanation for what they thought had happened. The pilot and the co-pilot both told the police that the exit door of the airplane opened fairly easily and that they believed that perhaps Alfred Lowenstein had bumped against the door. The door flew open and Lowenstein fell out of the plane.
They eventually recovered the body after about 3 weeks, and it only led to more questions than answers. And it was an unrecognizable corpse, badly decomposed. Fishermen found it, and when they found him, he was wearing Lowenstein's watch.
Lowenstein.
Lowenstein's watch.
That gets me too.
His silk underwear, his socks, and his shoes. And the rest of his clothes he was wearing were never found. Lowenstein was wearing shoes, but then somehow his pants came off.
That's an odd one. I don't quite get that one. Maybe the fisherman took the pants. I don't know. But a private autopsy was done at the request of Lowenstein's wife, Madeline. He was found to have a cracked skull and several broken bones, which is not inconsistent with a long 4,000-foot fall into the English Channel from an airplane. Doctors concluded that he had died from the fall, and otherwise they found nothing abnormal. There was no poison in his system. He had no big medical issues. There was no indication of foul play, no defensive wounds.
Madeline had Alfred buried in her family's cemetery in an unmarked grave. She also declined to attend his funeral. But the case, it wound down eventually in the press. Eventually, curiosity about his death was minimal from officials, to say the least, part of which being that he died outside of any official jurisdiction.
That's right. He was over the English Channel.
And with that, he was gone again.
So another mystery for us to solve. There's various theories. Could have been suicide. It could have been an accidental death, as the pilot and co-pilot thought. And some people even thought perhaps murder. And there was even some discussion of perhaps an Orient Express sort of murder scenario where everybody on the plane took part in the killing.
I like the theory that maybe he tried to disappear.
It could be that. Maybe he faked his own death. It's not so he could skip town. Yeah. That's a viable theory also. But go back to the beginning here. Let's go. I'll bring you in on a few more details here.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
It was July 4th, 1928. Lowenstein and his entourage left the Croydon airfield in the south of London. It was apparently the number one aerodrome
in England at the time.
Yeah. So they take off about 6:30 p.m. and the plan was to fly to Brussels, about 200 miles east, on Lowenstein's private airplane. As you informed us, that's a Belgian-made Fokker 7 trimotor.
Yeah. A fun little plane that was capable of cruising at a breathtaking 106 miles an hour. So this should have been about a 2-hour flight, assuming no headwinds or anything like that. The weather was good. Sunset at Dunkirk was about 9:07 p.m., so it was a daylight flight.
So let's also talk about who's on there.
Yeah.
The suspects.
Our possible murder suspects or witnesses, or whatever you want to call them.
There were 6 people on the plane. There was Donald Drew, who was the pilot. Robert Little, who was a co-pilot and mechanic. Fred Baxter, that was Lowenstein's valet. Arthur Hodgson, who was a secretary and business associate. Eileen Clark, who was a stenographer. And Paula Biddalon, who was also a stenographer, correct?
Yeah, also. He actually, Lowenstein liked to travel with a couple of stenographers because he was a very, very energetic, busy guy. And he was constantly dictating memos and letters. And so having 2 stenographers there to bounce back and forth between apparently was his just standard way of doing business.
Wow.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons he got so rich, is the guy was just so energetic. But it should be noted that by this point in his life, he had developed a few health problems. He was a workaholic and a stressful job. He had apparently very high blood pressure. And he had had some recent lapses, which may have been related to the stress and perhaps the high blood pressure. He had some absent-mindedness, which included one incident where he nearly walked into the propeller of his plane. That would be the Fokker 7 trimotor. Nearly walked into it.
So, I mean, that would maybe lead to the theoretical explanation that it could be an accident, that he just sort of Mr. Magoo'd out the back of the plane.
Yeah, he could have like mistaken the door of the head for the exit door of the plane.
And it would have been dark at this time?
No, it would have been light still, but I don't know how light it was inside that airplane.
Yeah.
Of course, and that has been proposed as a theory, is that perhaps he mistook one door for the other. But I have a problem with that,
Okay.
which is this. The way it worked is to save weight, they didn't have a separate door. There was a door between the passenger compartment and the little compartment at the back that had the entry foyer and that had the head. Mm-hmm. And there was a door between that. And that door doubled as the door to the head. Mm. So when that door was open, then the head was closed. And when that door, and people are boarding and deboarding the plane. Mm-hmm. And in flight, if you needed to use the head, then you just went back and shut that door between the main cabin and that little foyer, mm-hmm. and use the head. The head at that point has no door on it; it's open. So mm-hmm. if you walk back into that little foyer and close the door between it and the main passenger cabin, then there was no chance of mistaking the head door for the exit door.
Yeah.
Because the head would have no door on it. He could look in there and see a toilet.
Yeah. Well, and then also the police attempted to open the door mid-flight on a similar aircraft.
Well, yeah, this is
do it.
Yeah, they tried at cruising speed, which I said is about 106 miles an hour, and they tried to force the door open, and they found that, well, it didn't want to open. I mean, just try opening your car door. It's on the freeway at 60 miles an hour. And see what, it's not easy, right?
It makes sense. It actually makes perfect sense.
Imagine it nearly double the speed. So the whole idea that he fell out of the plane seems a little silly to me.
Now, refresh my memory. When the plane landed, did they find this door open or closed?
Closed.
It was closed, so it was shut.
Yeah, it's nothing seriously wrong. There was one theory that one person put out is that perhaps the pilot and the co-pilot had conspired to murder Lowenstein, and they placed a door that was faulty, that didn't latch correctly on the in the entry to the plane, landed on the beach so that one of them could hop out of the plane and pull that door off the plane, and then swap it with the door to the luggage compartment, which was an identical sized door, which worked correctly. And that's one thing. I find that a little hard to believe, because even if the door didn't latch correctly, it still would not have come open easily.
Okay, so now we're getting into murder. If these guys wanted to kill him, why would they do that? Why would the pilot kill him?
Well, I know. And, for one thing, of course, being a highly successful millionaire, he's obviously screwed some people in the past. And so he had a few enemies in that respect. It could have been a hit. That somebody paid the pilot and the co-pilot to murder him is a possibility. And the possibilities of suicide and murder kind of mixed together here, because in spring and summer 1928, an anonymous document was being circulated in financial circles in Europe, which accused Lowenstein of quite a few financial crimes in the course of building his little empire. And this actually caused a big hit on his holding company's stock. It did plummet, and so on paper, at least, his fortune did actually go down quite a bit. And people involved in business dealings with Lowenstein began to see him as a liability. Papers reported he'd been turned down for $1 million loan, so apparently he was maybe a little hard up for walking around cash. Right. And so is it possible that his financial empire was about to fall apart? And the pressure got to be too much. This would explain the suicide thing. But also, he had business partners in his holding company. Mm-hmm. This is where murder comes in. If they saw him as more of a liability than an asset at this point in time, then perhaps they thought they should just get him out of the way, and then they could just say, well, he's gone, no harm, no foul, let's go back to business as usual.
I mean, I think from, pardon the bad pun, 30,000 feet, that looks good. But when you really start thinking about it, I don't know that holds up.
Murder?
Murder or suicide. If it's suicide, how's he get out of the plane? They tried to open the door and couldn't do it.
That's it, yeah. He was in his 50s. I'm not sure what kind of shape he was in, but it would have been pretty difficult to force the door open far enough to get out of the plane.
Right.
I mean, maybe he could have somehow forced it and squeezed through it. And I don't know, maybe. Yeah.
And then in terms of murder, there has to be. I mean, Joe, there has to be an easier way to kill a guy than in a tiny space with 6 witnesses or 4 other witnesses, whoever was involved.
Yeah, there's got to be. I mean, I would think there's poisoning, or maybe run them over with a car. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to kill somebody.
Right, and make it look like a random mugging on the streets of London.
Yeah.
It's just not a very elegant way to go about a murder.
Oh, I know. But there is one guy who's actually probably more than anybody else researched this case, and the guy's name is William Norris, and he wrote a book called The Man Who Fell from the Sky, which was published in 1987. And he is the foremost proponent of the murder theory. He believes that Pilot Drew and co-pilot Little were hired by Lowenstein's business partners to kill him. Some other possible suspects might include his wife or some of his enemies, as I'd said. I don't think that his wife really is a viable suspect personally. So why his partners wanted to kill him? As I already mentioned, there was that anonymous document that was making the round. Perhaps avoid being drug under by him if he did wind up going down for a bunch of financial crimes. Which seems like a reasonable motive. Again, it would be there's easier ways to do this.
That's insane.
Yeah, and of course, in a sense, but the other problem I have with this theory is that when the word came that Lowenstein had disappeared, when that hit the news, stocks in his company dropped quite a bit. So these guys actually lost money. His partners lost money when he disappeared.
Yeah, and then when if you were to kill Elon Musk,
what happens to SpaceX?
Right, exactly. That stock would probably fall. It would be a great money-making proposition.
Indubitably, it would fall. Did I just say indubitably? Oh my God. Yeah, I think they really would have done more damage to themselves by killing him. But again, I don't know how strong the case for financial malfeasance was against Lowenstein either.
Yeah. Do we have any idea who distributed this document, this anonymous document?
I think the name eventually did come out, and I think I messed up and didn't note it in my notes here. Damn it. I know.
So, okay, but
it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, we think we know who it was. And
it was,
would they be considered a suspect?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think so. And I think that if you really want to murder him, if you got that big of a grudge against him, maybe this is just me and my mindset. I would be thinking I wouldn't telegraph my motive to everybody by penning this anonymous letter and then killing him. When, by the way, when eventually your name is going to be linked to the letter, and you'll be a prime suspect.
Maybe the idea was to knock him out of his position of power with the letter, and when that failed, they crafted the plot.
That could have been it. Yeah, I suppose so. Or maybe the idea was to just blacken his name enough so that when he disappeared, people would, instead of being shocked and dismayed, would just be kind of relieved. Right. Maybe that was the idea. I don't know.
All of these plans are so elaborate. Though.
They are. And it is rather elaborate. But William Norris, the author, did some extensive research. As I said, he did find that both Drew, the pilot, and Little, the co-pilot, after that flight, lived well beyond their means for quite a long time. And as for the valet, the secretary, and the stenographers, well, if they didn't participate in the murder, they must have been at least paid off under this theory, or maybe made to disappear. And actually, Arthur Hodgson, the secretary, and the two stenographers actually do vanish from history after this point.
That's interesting.
So maybe they were murdered, done away with. Baxter.
Pretty easy to lose somebody in 1926, though.
But Mr. Baxter, the valet, on the other hand, did not vanish. He was hired by Lowenstein's son, Bobby Lowenstein. But he did die several years later, about 4 years later, I think, from an apparently self-inflicted gunshot wound. Made with Bobby Lowenstein's revolver, by the way.
It's also sketchy. I mean, it's so weird how there's people disappearing and suicides.
Yeah,
it does seem like there's something to it.
There is something sketchy about this. Somebody vanishes, and the suicide, of course, was years later. One of the theories that I have, and I may be jumping ahead of myself here, is that if you're thinking that perhaps Baxter, the valet, was murdered and made to look like a suicide, maybe he found out something he wasn't supposed to know. Maybe he found out that Lowenstein had disappeared, was living somewhere else under a different name, and once he found that out, he had to be gotten rid of. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
I mean, so if we're going to get onto that theory, I favor, in general, much more pedestrian explanations of things like this.
Yeah, me too.
But in this case, the thing that kind of makes the most sense is that he pays off the people on the airplane, lands the airplane in France, as you would say, beats feet out of there.
Yeah.
The police come, they say, we lost him.
Yeah,
And
he fell out of the plane.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's in a car headed for Belgium, headed for Russia, headed for wherever he wants to go.
He could have even actually, he could have even not told most of the people on the plane. He could have just told the pilot, say, here's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to pay you. Or maybe he told both pilot and co-pilot, and he paid them off handsomely and said, look, I'm going to go in the back and well, actually thinking about it, let me think here. So I have had this thought that perhaps he hadn't had that plane that long. Perhaps he bought it for a reason, and that is that from the head or from the 4A compartment, perhaps he could have installed a hidden door. So if he wants to fake his own disappearance and death, so he's got his plane all prepped and everything. He goes back. He's already clued the pilot in and said, land me on this beach. And then he goes to the head, but goes and hides with the luggage instead. And as soon as he touches down on the beach, then he heads out the luggage compartment door and lays flat. And the pilot, of course, under instructions, moseys down the beach a ways, taxis down the beach, and then Lowenstein picks himself up and walks across the beach. At this point, he's far enough in the rearview mirror. He just looks like some random dude walking down the beach.
Yeah.
So he walks across the beach, and there's a road right there.